Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Whitney, and this is Wellness Wednesday. So thank you for joining me. This is part 2 of our talk about the new viral illness hysteria that is happening. If you joined us last week, thank you for watching and sharing. That was my highest watched video ever so far. So again, if you are new, I'm Dr. Whitney. My practice is holistic home health and wellness. I am also online as Dr. Mom ND. On my YouTube channel, I share a lot of the videos that specifically relate to moms and kids. But today we are continuing our talk about antiviral approaches from naturopathic medicine, from the naturopathic perspective. And I'm sorry, I am 15 minutes late because wouldn't you know it, I logged on to Facebook today, and of all things, they decided to have a completely new version of trying to do Facebook Live. And for the life of me, I could not figure it out. And then at the very end, I almost gave up and was going to do it on my phone. And there's a button on the top that says, switch back to previous version. Yes, please. And then when it asks you why, I had to say, because it was too complicated. I put my post in there and there was like no go live button. It was grayed out. You couldn't see it. So I'm sorry. Just more technological, advances and complications in my life. So I want to kind of follow what I said in my post. We're going to review several different things that I've collected over the last week. I've got a couple different articles, some data, and especially the book that I shared right at the end last week, Herbal Antivirals, Natural Remedies for Emerging and Resistant Viral Infections by Stephen. I'm just going to say Stephen. I don't know. Bunner. I don't know. Maybe. Anyways, there's some really good information in there. And part of this whole, again, I'm using the word hysteria. I'm probably not helping, right? But here's the deal. The more we understand about viruses and how viral infections work, I think will help you to understand that this isn't as scary as what the media is making it out to be. There's a little bit of history that can help put this pandemic into perspective, if you will, in terms of the numbers. And also an article that I read from a pediatrician. She spent a lot of time on this, and there's a lot of specific research that she is reading and quoting. And she starts out kind of the same way, talking about the terminology, like educating you on understanding what the terminology means. Because if you just left it to the imagination, outbreak sounds horrible. Pandemic sounds even scarier. Oh my God, it's a global pandemic. Oh my God, what does novel coronavirus mean? That must be a horrible thing, right? So I think I'm going to start off with just a little bit of information about which a lot of it was, refresher for me in this book. I didn't actually go back to digging out my medical microbiology notes, but this, I think, is putting it in, to some extent, terms that are really easy for people to understand. So one of the first things to understand, I talked about last time, kind of the differences between bacterial infections and viral infections, and how viruses essentially, it's controversial. Some people say they're not alive. Some people say they're more like a parasite and they need a host to live. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. Essentially, what you can think of as a virus is it's an incomplete entity. It cannot reproduce of its own accord. So when it's outside of a host, whether that's a pig, a bird, a mosquito, a tick, or a human, it basically is in hibernation. It's kind of like a seed for a plant that hasn't germinated yet. And that's what essentially spreads. So when we're coughing and sneezing, that's what we're spreading around, the little particles that are, they're not exactly spores, they're just kind of hibernating. They're waiting for the right environment to open themselves up and start replicating to create what we know as the infection. Okay. So that's the first thing. There are different types of viral illnesses. Now, what we're really talking about, we're kind of focusing on respiratory viral illnesses, okay? So even though people have gone way beyond flu at this point, down the coronavirus tunnel, whether you like it or not, the flu RSV, coronaviruses, which include this strain of coronavirus, as well as SARS, and other viruses like rhinoviruses, which cause the common cold, adenoviruses, and even parainfluenza viruses, which cause things like croup. They are all respiratory viral illnesses, and that's what we're really focusing. So we're not looking at enteroviruses, which are, stomach flu, gut bug type things, food poisoning. We're focusing more on just the inhaled stuff. So that's respiratory viral illnesses. They have two methods of replicating, okay? So there's DNA and RNA in general, okay? So a lot of these respiratory viral illnesses, the reason we don't have vaccines for all of them is because a lot of them are RNA based, okay? So DNA is double-stranded, it's much more stable, and when a DNA-based virus gets inside of our body and starts replicating, it replicates itself exactly. So it's very, very stable, it doesn't mutate, and that's where you can get vaccines that over their lifetime essentially stay the same, because the virus doesn't necessarily mutate and change to the extent that we have to make a new vaccine every year. Now, saying that, that's exactly why the flu has a new vaccine every year, because it is an RNA-based virus. So when it replicates in our body, it's making little minor changes all the time. And this is why some of these viruses are so deadly, because what they do is they get in a pig or a bird and they swap out little pieces of the genetic code, and they take a piece here and they take a piece there, and they say, okay, now I'm new, now I'm novel, I'm a new strain. And then they jump over into humans. And that's why they can be so deadly, because they change all the time. And so an RNA-based virus is very difficult to control with a vaccine, because it changes all the time. And that's why the flu vaccine year to year changes. They're taking their best guess at what happened last year to see how they think it might change to pick the new strain to try to prevent in the next coming year. But the whole process of that, plus manufacturing and getting it out, by the time it's out, if they've already got it wrong, there's nothing they can do about it. And that's why it's so controversial, and why we say you're better off doing things like supplementing with vitamin D. We know that that helps prevent the flu, and we talked about in the last video as well why flu season correlates with the winter and lack of sunlight. We're getting less vitamin D. So that was two of the big things. See, I made all my notes here. So I want to make sure I'm covering everything, because I wanted to keep it in an orderly manner. RNA, DNA, okay, RNA are changing all the time. That's like the flu virus. Now, spoiler alert, coronavirus is an RNA-based virus. So even if all of this media hype about vaccines comes to fruition, if they actually get something out there in 9 to 12 months, from my understanding of this, if it's RNA based, that vaccine, it would have to be a new vaccine next year anyway. So people need to get off the idea that a vaccine is going to save them with this illness, because it's essentially just like the flu. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. Despite the fact that it is a global pandemic, it is basically no different than the flu. Same family, same way that it reproduces in the body, same kind of symptoms. It's just more deadly because right now it's a new strain and it is targeting the elderly and immune compromised. Okay, so we talked about hibernation. The respiratory viral infections is the family we're focusing on. Putting a little bit of this into perspective. Okay, so a couple things I should say first are the words outbreak, pandemic, and epidemic. Okay, so this comes from an article written on a blog, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, by a pediatrician. I had her name here somewhere, but I had a really difficult time getting this article to print too, so I don't know if Elisa Song, MD. So I want to make sure I give her credit for this. Okay. She also recently updated this as of March 3rd, yesterday. So she updated this with new statistics, travel risk assessments, and testing guidelines. As she says, flu hysteria has now transformed into coronavirus hysteria. So time to put the facts down. As she said, okay, I liked the way she educated in the initial openings of this article. So an outbreak happens when a disease occurs in greater numbers than expected in a community, okay? This can be just one case, okay? For example, and this is a bad example because I hate this topic, it's so controversial, but let's just say measles, okay? One case of measles in a community could be classified as an outbreak, right? Because conventionally we're saying, people are vaccinated and measles don't happen, right? Okay. So even just one case can be considered an outbreak. You can have outbreaks in different communities. An epidemic is an outbreak that spreads rapidly to many people, okay? So again, thinking about that. An outbreak is a disease that occurs in greater numbers than expected, okay? So the fact that the coronavirus is a new strain of the virus, so even one case could be considered an outbreak. And if that happens rapidly in many different communities, that's an epidemic. So we're not talking about wiping out millions of people as an epidemic. We're talking about a new infection that is just spreading rapidly, okay? Still not talking about death, just the infection. A pandemic is an epidemic of global proportions that has become widespread across several countries or continents, okay? So an outbreak, new strain, not expected. Epidemic, it's spreading rapidly. And pandemic, that it has spread to more than one country. So even though we're talking about a global pandemic, actually that's kind of a, we say when you're saying the same thing twice, because a pandemic is already global. So a pandemic infection, it's just something that is new, not expected, spreading fast, and has been in multiple countries. So again, we're not talking about rates of infection or mortality here. That's something totally different. Now, COVID-19 is the name of the respiratory illness caused by the 2019. Okay, now it's referred to as novel because it's a new strain. Okay, these are a large that are named for the spikes on their surface, which look like crowns. Corona, which means crown in Latin. Sorry. So now I don't updated her statistics, so let's see what she being target, yada yada yada, as a second percent of the worldwide China. March 2nd, there were a little over 100 cases in the US. These included 3 people from China before the travel ban and 45 people who were repatriated to the US from the cruise ship. Okay. I think that's everything she had. How is it transmitted? We talked about that. The symptoms are mild. Mortality rate. This is what I want to talk about. Okay, because this has been coming up in conversation with a few people. So I also shared this on my Facebook page, the Wuhan coronavirus compared to other major viral pandemics. So as you can see there, the numbers, not so big, especially when you look at the fatality rate, okay? So this virus is at a fatality rate of 2%, and that is very insignificant compared to other ones. So just for reference, okay? So the H1N1 in 2009 had 1,600,000 cases, 285,000 deaths, a 17.5% fatality rate. So we're not even in the realm of what the H1N1 flu was a few years ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And even SARS, the big scary SARS outbreak in 2002, 8,000 cases, 775 deaths, 9.5% fatality rate. So that was that. And as far as mortality rate for this one, what she's continuing on to say is that we don't really know. The number of deaths in China is obviously devastating, but may not be reflective of mortality rates in other parts of the world, given the tragic lack of hospital staff, medical supplies, ICU beds, testing, et cetera, that China is facing. So there have been 2,800 deaths in China, puts the mortality rate in China at about 3.5%. Outside of China, however, there have only been 86 deaths out of 6,000 some cases, which is only a 1.4% mortality rate. Compare this to the mortality rate of influenza, which is estimated to be around 0.095 in the US. However, certain populations do seem to be more at risk. So this is one she mentioned seen elsewhere, is that children appear to be relatively spared by this virus. So increasing age seems to be the most important factor for those at serious risk of infection and death. And the risk of death increases with age. Being over 80 is the The fatality rate of patients over 80 was estimated to be actually 14.8%. Death under 50 appears unlikely, with the mortality rate of 49-year-olds only estimated at 0.4%, 0.2% for patients 10 to 39, and as noted, there have been no deaths in children 0 to 9. Obviously, having a chronic pre-existing medical condition also increases your risk. Without any pre-existing condition, the mortality rate was 0.9%. Okay. History of cardiovascular disease, obviously, or other respiratory illness, I would think would also increase the risk. She says here specifically 10.5% with cardiovascular disease. So like the influenza virus, the elderly and those with any underlying chronic medical conditions appear to be at risk for the most serious complications and death. However, unlike influenza, children so far appear to be relatively protected. Okay. So pharyngeal swab, throat swab, or sputum, looking for specific genetic material of the virus. So that was some of the information from her. And I think that I wanted to touch on the historical stuff because I thought this was interesting. So again, when I talk about the vaccines and the flu vaccine specifically, we talk about how there are several strains in there that were the historically significant ones that were the most dangerous. And one of them was the flu in 1918. This was the most deadly one in all of history. So this was, oh no, I didn't write it down. H1N1 strain, I believe, 23. Let me see. I put the page down for myself. So it was, well, I have the notes here. So basically what happened in 1918 was a couple different factors that made this flu so dangerous and why some of these viruses now are evolving so quickly and become so, quote, deadly so fast for us, like the pig flu. So in 1918, it was the end of World War I. Soldiers in very poor conditions, sanitary conditions, poor food, poor sleep, tight quarters was like the ideal soup mixing area for new viruses. So basically, it to pigs and humans, and it infected all of these people. And by the end of World War I, when all these people went home, they spread it everywhere, which is why it spread so quickly. It infected 500 million people, and 100 million people died. Okay, it actually killed 6 times more people than World War I in half the time. So I thought that was pretty crazy. But yeah, the war conditions led to the perfect breeding ground for viral mutations, swapping out genetic material, jumping and birds and humans. And that was why that one strain is always in the vaccine, as far as I know, is what they said, because their biggest fear is that this one is going to combine with another strain and lead to another horrible event like that. Now, what did I say? Page 23. Okay, 26. So the reason that, okay, the flu, this particular flu virus, where does I say? There was something in here about, yes, flu vaccines have to be made for the specific virus that emerges in that year. This means that the disease will already be moving throughout the world before production even begins, okay? If it is a true pandemic of a deadly strain, by the time the vaccine is produced and shipped, normally a 3 to 6 month process, the infrastructure of the world will already be failing. The healthcare workers, hospitals, transportations will be the first to fall. Systems will shut down, quarantines will be put in place, and people will just have to survive as best they can, as they always have. So this was all about influenza, but the point here is it's the same kind of concerns that people are having over coronavirus right now. So the biggest thing is to keep things clean, right? So everybody's talking about hand washing and the masks, which we now know are actually not for the healthy, but for the sick, to stop the spread. Let's see, what else did this say? There are 3 different groups of influenza, type A, B, and C. So type A is the most virulent. Type B is relatively stable and mutates much more slowly. Most people in childhood at least develop some immunity to this, making it much less dangerous. Influenza C is very rare. It does infect people, sometimes severely, but it usually only causes a mild illness, generally in children. So when people are talking about influenza pandemics, what they're usually talking about is influenza A in one of its many genetically altered forms. The 1918 pandemic was caused by an influenza A strain. So the most dangerous strains are currently H1N1, which we talked about. That was in the chart here from 2009. So H1N1, 2009, as you can see, the numbers are quite significant over the rest. And okay, H2N2, which caused the Asian flu pandemic in 1957, H3N2, which caused the Hong Kong flu pandemic in 68, and now a relatively new one, H5N1, known as avian or bird flu, which caused the pandemic in 2000. Then H1N1 came again. It was the source of the swine flu pandemic in 2009 and is a modified descendant of the 1918 strain. So, since influenza viruses and all viruses alter their genetic structure significantly, at least the RNA ones, year by year, passing through both birds, this is what is feared the most. So the Asian flu in 2004 was a species jump. The swine flu in 2009 was a unique genetic rearrangement. Viral geneticists have traced the lineage of the 2009 swine flu, a virulent H1N1 strain, to an H3N2 strain that emerged in 1998 in US factory farms, specifically huge hog farms in which the animals are so tightly packed together they literally cannot move. So this is what is happening in our modern society with all of our modern conveniences and big egg farming and everything else. So one of the biggest fears that epidemiologists and viral geneticists have is the possibility of a combined swine and avian flu strain. The crowding of human food animals, similar to crowding of soldiers in World War I, continually allows for the emergence of potentially virulent strains. Chicken farms in which unique avian flu strains can emerge and hog farms in which unique swine strains can emerge are all perfectly positioned to allow the combination of two into one potent and very deadly influenza strain. This kind of combined strain can pass easily to farm workers and then to the populations at large. Researchers have found that indeed an H3N2 swine flu easily combines with an H5N1 avian flu, and that would create an extremely pathogenic form of the virus. So again, this is stuff that is happening all the time. It's not that scary if you understand where it's coming from and how it's happening. And this then lends itself to what do we do about it, okay? So the most straightforward things that I have seen come out of everything lately are simply hand washing, okay? So you cough in your arm, you wash your hands. Those are easy things. Now, controversially right now, people are wearing masks. And what I've seen are more and more articles to the extent that the masks do not protect you from getting the virus. The masks are supposed to protect people from spreading the virus, okay? So even the ones that are used, this was an article that I shared. This was coronavirus update. And this was a guy. Who was this? I just saw this online and I cut it off. So I'm not sure, but I posted it on my Facebook page. So he is as well as many other doctors are calling for people to stop buying masks and wearing them. So additionally, even for healthcare workers with true exposure risk, the commonly used N95 masks are not able to filter out particles as small as the coronavirus, okay? So basically they don't work. Now, would someone wear one if they knew they were going to be exposed? Yes, just because they're perfect doesn't mean they don't work at all. But they need to fit exactly, and they need to be able to filter small enough particles. Otherwise, coronavirus is likely to pass through. So he talks about some general things because he noted in this article that the more people that are sharing natural remedies online, they're being removed. Their posts and things are being removed. So he talks a lot about sleep, which we know is important, eating healthy foods, not your food intolerances, which we know is important, reducing stress because we want to keep your immune system strong, regularly exercising, And then he talks a little bit about his family's seasonal immune support, which I talked about last week. Probiotics, cod liver oil, where you get your natural source of vitamin D from, otherwise whole food sources of vitamin D. I prefer the mega food vitamins. They're whole food based. Other people are talking about taking vitamin C, which is great. You can take it up to bowel tolerance, which is usually like a gram or two, but take it in divided doses throughout the day. He does say vitamin D3. The other thing about vitamin C and zinc I touched on before is that I believe it was Mayo Clinic that did a study that said they do not prevent illness, but they shorten the duration of symptoms. So again, taking vitamin C may not exactly stop the virus in its tracks, but it may lessen the intensity and duration that you are sick. Other natural immune support, he notes, there have been reports in areas of China where people who have been infected were selenium deficient. So selenium most commonly found in a well-rounded diet, powerful antioxidant associated with immune function. So obviously lower levels of immune function, higher levels, higher immune function. So something to keep in mind. He does mention probiotics, and then he does get into the herbals a little bit. So he gets into herbals a little bit, as well as this other gal does touch on them a little bit too. Now, the only thing is, I don't mind this pediatrician's article. She has a lot of good information in here and realistic information. She gives some background on the cytokine storm, which is part of how the virus replicates in our body. And this is part of why certain antivirals will work better than others. So depending on what immune cells in your body are most targeted by specific viruses, there are sometimes specific herbals for them. Now, again, her general information is similar to what I've said into this other guide too. Fish oil, probiotics, vitamin C, D3, and zinc. Okay, now as far as treating it, I did share last week this book, which was The Herbal Medicine from Heart of the Earth, Dr. Cheryl Tilner. This was the antiviral and immune support tincture that she has in this book. So this is something, like I said, there are general antivirals that you can take. There are multiple indications usually for one botanical, and that's what's so interesting about botanical medicine. It's not this one is antiviral, this one is for the immune system. Sometimes they do a little bit of both. Okay, I don't have a huge problem if you want to take some immune boosting stuff, right? But as far as the antiviral stuff goes, if you're not actually sick, if there is something that is specifically just antiviral, I would probably reserve that for when you're actually sick. Okay, it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf again. But as I will give you an example, in this formula, there's echinacea, licorice, osha, lavender, paracress, and cedar leaf. Echinacea, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral, and an immunomodulator. So it's antiviral and works on your immune system, okay? It increases the number and activity of white blood cells, enhances the resistance of the immune system to infections, used for colds, influenza, infections, allergies, bacterial, and viral disease, okay? Golden seal, same thing. Astringent, antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, and it has immune stimulating qualities to increase the blood supply to the spleen. Myrrh, antiseptic, antifungal, carminative, expectorant, and analgesic. So, I'm sorry, this was the next page. Oh, my bad. Okay, so skip myrrh. That was for a cough syrup. That's why there's an expectorant. Okay, so echinacea is the same. Licorice inhibits the growth of viruses. It's anti-inflammatory and immunomodulator, neutralive and spasmolytic. So again, they're not antiviral in the sense that they're killing the virus, and this is also true for antiviral medications for the few that conventional medicine has. It's not like an antibiotic in the sense that an antibiotic kills the bacteria. Antiviral medications, antiviral herbs, what they're doing is they're making the environment less habitable for the virus. They're literally taking the conditions depending on the virus and saying, okay, this virus needs these cells to be sticky, okay? And a particular antiviral medication might make those cells less sticky. And then if there's nothing to stick to, the virus has nothing to stick to replicate. And so it's kind of a roundabout way. It's not killing the virus. It's just preventing the conditions needed for the virus to continue replicating, which then gives your body a chance to catch back up and remove all of those factors as well. OSHA is another one, antiviral and also immunomodulating, used in respiratory infections. Lavender, interestingly, immunomodulating and antiviral. Paracress, antifungal, antiviral, antiseptic, also used for enhancing the resistance of the immune system to infections. Cedar leaf, antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, specific to the respiratory, digestive, and urinary tract. So that one doesn't say immunomodulating. So again, there are some that have multiple applications and some that have just singular ones. Was the other thing I wanted to share. So I thought I wrote it down. Yeah, so when I talked about the fact that there are certain viruses that will have certain affinities for specific cells. And this is why respiratory viral strains can be so much more virulent than even encephalitis or enteroviruses, because as soon as we breathe them in, they're in, and they don't have to travel anywhere else, because our immune system immediately comes to the aid of whatever comes in our body that shouldn't be there. These viruses have learned that the fastest way into the body then is to bind to those cells. So for example, again, in this book, this is where I found this information. HIV binds to T4 lymphocytes. Epstein-Barr virus binds to B cells. Japanese encephalitis binds to monocytes. So we know that certain viruses like to bind to certain cells in our immune system. That's what's targeted. And so that's when we're looking at treatment options. There are sometimes specific ones, specific treatments, specific herbals, botanicals for specific viruses. So that said, I think this pediatrician gal, like I said, she talks about a few botanicals, but again, she is a pediatrician. So all she has to say is that there are currently no specific antiviral medications known to treat COVID-19. Treatment is supportive. Okay. Scientists are actively researching the possible existing or new antiviral medications that may have activity against this and vaccines that may help to prevent it. Tamiflu will not work. So say that again. Tamiflu, not for this virus. Okay. It doesn't work the same way. The flu virus itself is different than the coronavirus. So again, it's not going to help in the way that Tamiflu may help with the flu. Manufacturing and testing of new pharmaceutical agents and vaccines likely takes several months to a year. Okay, so in the meantime, are there any existing natural treatments that might work? She says, we just don't know. Really? We don't know. We don't know. I've got this book. I've got this book. I've got other books. We don't know. We don't know. Interesting. We don't know. This book, Herbal Antivirals, was written how long ago? Many years ago, because I bought it 10 years ago, and it's got stuff right here for SARS and coronavirus. Okay, so that kind of irritated me, but she's a pediatrician. So a huge amount of funding has been committed to clinical treatment trials while we wait anxiously for results. I urge scientists and researchers to consider some of the evidence we have about natural treatments for prior coronavirus outbreaks, such as SARS and MERS, and sepsis that may theoretically hold promise for successfully treating COVID-19 and would be readily available, much less costly than any new engineered drug. No kidding. Okay, so she says, I am here to educate and inform, not to recommend particular treatments because we don't know if they'll be effective. These are all theoretical possibilities only. That's what she says. Please do not stockpile these natural medicines. Whatever. She talks about elderberry, which we know does have specific anti-influenza activity, also found to have some strong activity against coronavirus. This is not the same as the elderberry syrup you find on shelves, okay? This is the one thing that she does say. The caffeic acid component of Sambucus formosana naki. Okay, so only one kind of Sambucus, elderberry. And it's not going to be the one that's commonly in your elderberry syrup. So this caffeic acid that's only found in this one strain of elderberry is what's responsible for its anti-COVID activity. So it inhibits replication and blocks attachment. Caffeic acid is not related to caffeine, but is found in many foods such as coffee, wine, turmeric, basil, thyme, oregano, sage, cabbage, apples, strawberry, cauliflower, radishes, mushrooms, kale, pears, and olive oil. It definitely couldn't hurt to load up on caffeic acid-rich foods, minus the coffee and wine, perhaps. She says, please note, I've been asked where people can find this strain, and unfortunately, as far as I can tell, it's not available commercially. So, okay. Oregano, though, is interesting because we have talked about oregano oil having antiviral properties. So I keep oregano oil capsules around on hand for any time we get some kind of a viral infection. Traditional Chinese medicine, I'm not even going to get into because that is not my toolbox. That's really all she talks about. Other natural agents she mentions curcumin, quercetin, more probiotics, boswellia, and more of this is to work with the inflammatory processes that these infections can cause. Lomatium, I don't know why she stuck it down here, claimed to have prevented the Washoe Indian tribes from dying during the 1918 pandemic, also called the Spanish flu pandemic. In the SARS and coronavirus sepsis, one of the inflammatory markers was noted. Poor prognosis with influenza A is also associated lomatium. So yeah, lomatium is one that was noted. But I'll show you just for reference. So in this particular book, the natural treatment protocols for influenza, he says, again, just to emphasize, there are thousands of combinations of plant medicines that can be created to treat respiratory infections. And that's true, because I just custom blended a tincture this week for a little guy who's having some trouble. He's got a nasty chest cough and congestion. So you can customize these things. There are ones that are pre-made, but this, for example, gives you some options for treatment protocols for influenza. Early onset, we talked about those homeopathic remedies, either oscillococcinum, or I have the mucococcinum, which is a similar product from Soroil. Herbal tinctures, he uses echinacea, sometimes some ginger, licorice, echinacea. The herbal tincture must touch the affected membranes. It is antiviral. It's been found against HIV, different strains of influenza, H5N1, H7N1, and H1N1. Okay, mild infections. He talks about more fresh ginger juice tea. Ginger is useful for the flu only if the juice of the fresh root is used. Dried ginger is useless. Okay, and then this is a whole list of other anti-influenza herbs and supplements. So again, this book is a great resource. He does comment, some people find that an elderberry syrup provides the same effects as the fresh ginger juice tea, but again, maybe only specific strains. Herbal tincture combinations, he gives examples. There's other examples for moderate and severe infections. The anti-tincture formulation that he recommends for flu-related, equal parts of Chinese skull cap istasis, licorice, houtinoia. Wow, that's a Houttuinia, lomatium, which we just talked about, red root, yerba santa, elephant tree, osha, and either immortal or pleurisy root. So there's some stuff for flu. Now I know what everybody is interested in is the coronavirus, so let's skip. He does give a little bit of background too, and I kind of skipped over all of the biochemistry type stuff in here because it gets a little too overwhelming. I think people just want to hear, what do I need to take? They don't need to understand all the time the super details behind it. So he talks about the fact that there's a specific cell, okay, we'll just say that to make it simple, in the immune system, that during this cytokine storm, this, freak reaction of all this inflammation because our immune system's activated, that is something that we're looking at that gets reduced, okay? So to reduce certain levels during cytokine storms will help considerably, even if conditions significantly worsen. So he's got two different tinctures here. One is Angelica and Salvia, and another one is just a different form of infusion. So lots of different stuff. But now this is the big one, right? So SARS and coronavirus. So SARS impacts the body very similar to acute influenza and was first thought to be an emerging influenza strain. However, SARS, sudden acute respiratory syndrome, is actually a new emerging viral pathogen that appeared suddenly in 2002 in China. So this disease is characterized by fever, followed by respiratory symptoms, and ultimately, for some of those infected, progressive respiratory failure. So the nature of the virus at the time was unknown. However, coronaviruses are enveloped positive-stranded RNA viruses, okay? We talked about that. They possess the largest genome of all RNA viruses. They engage in a very high frequency of RNA combinations, continually producing new variants. Of the dozen or so coronaviruses, only 3 infect people, and among them, SARS is the most serious. It usually takes about 6 days to develop in the body, and like the flu, is primarily spread by respiratory droplets. The virus sheds particles in feces and urine, often for several weeks, and cleaning up after the ill can even spread the infection. Fever, cough, difficulty breathing are the first signs of disease. Headache, muscular stiffness, malaise, chills, all this typical night rash, nausea, diarrhea may occur. Okay, with increasing age comes increasing fatality. Those under age of 24 are not often very susceptible. 25 to 44, he says the fatality rate was about 6%, 15% in ages 45 to 60, and greater than 50% in those over 65. So SARS, unlike influenza, attaches not to sialic acid linkages, but to angiotensin converting enzyme 2. So this is what it attaches to in the body. Now, understanding all that, I'm going to skip over that stuff because, as you can see, this is all the, interferon factors, cytokines, interleukins, and that's all stuff that you just don't want to get into. So, medical treatment. He has ribavirin, is only marginally effective against the SARS, but is still used in spite of the side effects. Corticosteroids are often used to try to reduce inflammation. Rimetidine and lopinavir have both been found active in vitro. Okay, now SARS protocol, natural protocol, that's what everyone wants to know, right? So the plants found specific for the SARS viruses are Chinese skullcap, the Houtuynia, Houttuinia. That is not a herb I'm familiar with. Istasis, licorice, forsythia, and sephora. And he says he would use the same protocol for influenza outlined earlier with 2 exceptions. Because salvia is so specific for the virus, and due to the fact that the HMGB1 is usually present, he would use one of the other formulations from the flu from the day the infection begins, okay? And then because kudzu is so specific for this virus, he would add kudzu to the formulation as well. So other anti-SARS herbs, right here, he's got another list there. So again, there are treatment options. If you do find yourself sick, there are general antivirals for a host of viral infections. And then there are some that, depending again on how they attach and replicate in the body, we can kind of customize. And then the last little note here after that was I just wanted to touch again, because reminding you that this is a family of respiratory viral illnesses, okay? So adenoviruses, mild, generally easy to treat. Fever, respiratory, can progress to pneumonia, meningitis. Parainfluenza viruses are what we commonly know as croup. The throat is often swollen and interferes with breathing. But again, herbs specific for parainfluenza still include Chinese skullcap, elder, and licorice. Allium and cicer have also been found active. He uses a tincture of elderberry, skullcap, and licorice in equal parts. There's even stuff in here for RSV. So RSV, I've seen many people I know personally struggle with this with themselves and their children in the last couple years. This is also a single-stranded RNA virus with high variation in its genome. It is a very common infection in young children throughout the world. Causes inflammation in the bronchi and other types of respiratory infections. Herbs specific for RSV, again, include Chinese skullcap, Eleutherococcus, elder, Istasis, licorice, and sephora. He lists some other herbs that have also been found active as well. Treatment, same as for mild influenza. If it becomes serious, the same as for moderate to severe influenza, which he lists those things in here. Rhinoviruses are what cause the common cold, okay? Herbs, supplements specific for rhinovirus include ginger, echinacea, elder, eleutherococcus, quercetin, papaver, and raulia. A Japanese traditional formulation has also been highly effective. Its name is Prunus mume. So again, this is just respiratory viral illnesses. He's got whole other chapters on viral encephalitis infections and then enterovirus infections, which are gut ones. And then he actually gets into the specific botanicals themselves. So rather than just saying, oh, this is the one that's good. For instance, he has the top 7 antiviral herbs: Chinese skullcap, elder, ginger, the Hoichenia astasis, licorice, and lomatium. And then he talks about each one. So the family, the species used, common names, the part used, because that is important. If you're going to get into dabbling in botanical medicine, you need to understand what parts of the plant you're using. That's something we study all 4 years in medical school. Different parts of the plant have different properties. So the property that may be antiviral might come from the root of the plant, not the flower or the leaf or the stem. So you have to look at that too. For instance, here with Chinese skullcap, the root and only the root is what's used, generally only from plants older than 3 years of age. This is reason to believe that the increase in pharmacological action of Chinese skullcap over the usual American species used as medicinals is due to the difference between using the root in Chinese practice and the leaf in American practice. Okay, so that's why. That's important. He talks about then preparation and dosage, how to make tinctures, how to use different forms of it, side effects, contraindications. Again, botanical medicine is medicine. It is what conventional pharmaceutical drugs are based on. So if you're going to use botanical medicine, you need to make sure you're looking at side effects and contraindications, especially if you're taking other medications. Herb, drug, and herb interactions are important. So as he goes through, he kind of gives profiles of each of those top 7 botanicals. And then just general stuff for strengthening the immune system. So again, you can do specific things to strengthen your immune system. My preference is probiotics, vitamin D. These are things that are already in our body that work to strengthen our body every day versus I have a deficiency of elderberry syrup. There's no such thing, okay? So I wait to take those things that are extraneous to our body, not part of us naturally, when I'm actually sick, because then I'm run down and my body needs that extra outside help. But there are specific immune strengthening things you can do, like we talked about. Other medicinal mushrooms are great. One that is mostly immune system, and then he gets into cordyceps as a medicinal mushroom. Rhodiola is pretty good. Really what these are tonics. You can kind of think of them as something that's just strengthening the constitution of the body. So overall strengthening, giving support and energy to the adrenal system and thus the immune system to have the energy to fight things. So all right. Wow, 47 minutes. This went really long. Sorry, I probably should have cut this in 2 parts. So we'll see. I think I've covered maybe enough of this week. If anything, maybe what I'll do is put all of this into a concise kind of document that I've got some new templates to create some really fun e-documents for, and then maybe I'll just present the sort of concise summary of this next week as a last, like, these are all the things you do kind of deal. So again, washing hands, okay? Covering your mouth when you cough. Don't use a mask. It's not going to do anything. Get lots of sunlight, exercise, sleep, water, fresh air and sunshine. Try to keep your stress low. Take your probiotics. Take your cod liver oil and or vitamin D. If you want to take vitamin C and zinc, great. If you feel like you really want to take something like elderberry syrup or astragalus or echinacea, that's fine. But the biggest thing is to remember, if you have all of the fundamental stuff covered and you're a healthy individual, especially if you don't have any other complicating factors, autoimmune diseases or respiratory or cardiovascular illnesses already in your system, are probably not at very much risk of having a severe infection or being infected at all with coronavirus. So I think that is everything for today. And if you have any questions, obviously let me know. And we'll see about next week if we do sort of a review and overcap of this, if it's still warranted. overview and recap of this if it is still warranted. If not, we'll move on to another topic. So thank you again for joining me, and take care. Have a good day.